In Australia, over 40,000 men and women are currently behind bars. They've shattered countless lives, destroyed families. Some have been responsible for unspeakable violence.
There are just some people that are just evil of heart.
She's just scary. She's just real scary.
Some people are born with just that evil gene.
If you think you've seen and heard it all, you haven't. The truth of life behind bars in some of Australia's highest security prisons, told by the people who know.
It's dangerous on a daily basis. It's life-threatening.
Stabbings, hangings, people getting their heads stomped on.
If I was dangerous when I went in, I was more dangerous when I came out.
In this episode, we reveal what a notorious murderer has to say for his crimes.
He was convincing other prisoners and staff that he was innocent of the crime. It was like he was almost convincing himself.
Plus, the lengths prisoners will go to smuggle in phones.
There was a phone up his bum that started ringing.
You could actually see whose vagina was ringing. And I was like, oh God, you know, she didn't think to take the battery out or turn it off.
And the moment a jealous and violent man killed his girlfriend in broad daylight.
You can see the terror in her eyes. 69 seconds after that image is captured, Lisa is dead. You might think this woman looks like the most ordinary person in the world. But what Catherine Knight did to her partner is almost beyond belief. A crime so horrendous, she became the first woman in Australia deemed too dangerous to ever be released from prison.
It's not a murder that happens like in an angry moment. It's not a single act of revenge. She beheads him. She beheads him with such skill it's remarked upon by the forensic pathologist. She spent hours with his corpse, defiling it, rearranging it, beheading him like they behead animals in an abattoir.
Catherine Knight now calls Dilwinnia Correctional Centre home. It's Australia's largest women's prison, but of the 500 or so women detained here, none have committed anything on par with what she did. Yet inside jail, she's found a tranquility she's never known.
I reckon inside the head of Catherine Knight right now, she'd be super relaxed because she's got a routine. She's completely at peace with what she's done. And in her head, she's justified in her action. So it's an easy coping mechanism. If I've done something, but I have a reason for I done it, I can live with it.
You'd never guess the woman standing behind Cardinal George Pell is one of Australia's most notorious murderers. Kat Armstrong, a former inmate, says she's just as friendly as she looks.
The strongest memory I have of Kath Knight was her gentle and sociable demeanour. I couldn't believe it because the woman that I spoke to and got to know was not the woman that was portrayed on the media. She looked like, to me, a young grandmother.
Even at her trial, journalist Peter Lawler was struck by how placid she appeared.
Looked like a librarian, like a school teacher. She just looked like this sweet, middle-aged lady.
But looks can be deceiving, and in the normally tranquil Hunter Valley, Catherine Knight was a feared woman.
She's just real scary. She's just one of those women you avoid. You never park your car near her house. You cross the street if you see her coming.
From a young age, Catherine was surrounded by violence and abuse, and had a hair-trigger temper.
It was dystopian. It was dysfunctional. Her mother warned the boyfriends, warned people around her, you watch this one. She's got something in her. She's dangerous. She could change in a moment. A rage over nothing.
While some teenagers dream of marriage or travel, Catherine dreamed of working in an abattoir. And when she was 16, her dream came true.
It's pretty weird, isn't it, to aspire to work at an abattoir? Later, she spoke about how much she enjoyed that actual cutting the animals. It gave her pleasure. I think she said that was the happiest time of her life.
At age 19, she married Dave Kellett, the start of what would be a long cycle of violence.
The honeymoon went as planned as far as Kellett was concerned. He did the honourable thing a couple of times. He says 3 times, and he fell asleep. But then he woke up and she was throttling him. She was furious because apparently her parents had sex 5 times on the wedding night, and that's the prescribed number of times you have to have sex. So she throttled him. Welcome to married life, Dave.
If he was hoping this would be a one-off, Dave would have been disappointed.
This was a violent marriage, and Kellett seems to have been on the receiving end of it. One night he was late home from the darts. Catherine hated it when you were late home. She hit him in the head with a skillet, with a frying pan. She fractured his skull. He collapsed at the neighbours. He was taken to hospital. He was kept in hospital for a few days. The police asked him if he wanted to press charges, and he said no.
But by the time their first child was born, months later, Kellett had finally had enough and left Catherine for another woman.
It triggered a series of episodes that got progressively worse. There's a story that the baby was put on the train tracks and rescued by a local homeless guy. Before the train came, she took an axe down the main street. She threatened to kill people. This is all because David Kellett's left her for another woman.
Perhaps because violence was all Kath knew, her next partner, David Saunders, copped it just as badly.
Poor old Saunders comes home late from the pub one night, opens the door. She hits him in the face with a hot iron. There were burn marks on the side of his face. His workmates started taking bets on which parts of him would be missing in the morning. She stabbed him, and he got one of his friends to sew him up before work. I mean, it was a running joke among his friends. It wasn't much of a joke for Saunders.
Catherine's obsession with violence was no secret. It was on display. She decorated her home with symbols of death.
From very early on, Kath loved pelts. She loved skeletons. She had a morbid fascination with those things. She said it gave her comfort to be surrounded by these things. That maybe, I don't know, things that were dead couldn't challenge her. And she loved her knives. They hung above the marital bed. Can you imagine that?
Despite her violent reputation, Catherine was never single for too long. Her next partner, John Price, was a local miner, a good catch, and things started smoothly.
Well, this is the thing. There are good days with Kath. She's a fun girl. Things weren't exactly peaceful between Kath and Pricey, but they were good enough early on.
Of course, that was never going to last. Catherine was just as violent and volatile. Although John Price tried to leave her, by February 2000, they were back together.
She was very persuasive. When Kath wanted you back, she got you back. She could turn on the charm. Apparently, she was good in bed. I don't want to think about that.
But Catherine was no changed woman. The violence was getting worse. And not long after they were back together, she stabbed him, something she later blamed on her eyesight.
Once Pricey got off the phone, he started on me, and I was around washing up, and it could have been a fork, a spoon, or anything in my hand. It was a knife that cut your meal with, and I aimed it at him, and it got him. He was leaning closer than what I thought. And my eyesight was bad at that time. I've only had new glasses since then.
By late February, John Price was afraid for his life.
He ran into friends around town. They all recall that he was subdued, that he was sad. Yeah, Pricey knew what was coming. Nothing was going to stop Kath.
Coming up, the twisted crime that made Catherine Knight too dangerous to ever be released from prison.
There was a head in a pot on the stove.
It's something from a horror movie, legitimately. Yeah.
February 29, 2000. The sleepy town of Aberdeen, New South Wales, is about to become the unlikely setting for a horror story. John Price has confided in his colleagues at the coal mine. He's afraid his violent partner, Catherine Knight, will kill him.
He showed them where she'd stabbed him a few days earlier. They were worried about him. They offered him somewhere to stay, but he was worried that if he wasn't home, she'd go for his children.
That evening, Pricey returned home and fell asleep. And sometime later, Catherine showed up and let herself in.
She was planning to have sex with him that night. Planning to have sex with him and then kill him.
But this was no ordinary murder.
She kills him. 37 times she stabbed that man. Started stabbing him in the bed. Stabbed him as he ran down the hallway. Stabbed him as he got outside. Dragged him back inside. And he eventually bled to death.
What Kath did next defies belief. She prepared dinner, meat and potatoes. Except this wasn't animal meat.
She doesn't just cook him, does she? It's a long night. She serves up a meal on a plate. She cooked vegetables. She made gravy. She put out little notes to his children.
When Pricey didn't show up to work at the mine the next morning, his colleagues immediately sounded the alarm. But nothing could have prepared the police for what they saw when they entered Pricey's home.
She hung the skin up on a curtain up in there, so when the police were going through, they thought it was a curtain, but it was actually his skin.
There was a head in a pot on the stove.
It's something from a horror movie, legitimately. Yeah.
While the cops will never forget the horror of that day, Catherine Knight pretended to overdose on pills. They found her in the house unconscious. She claimed she couldn't remember what she did.
You recall Pricey being in the bed?
I can't remember anything.
Do you recall yourself going to bed?
Faintly.
She may have committed the worst crime imaginable. But the way former inmate Kat Armstrong describes her life inside prison, Catherine Knight is at peace.
Kath likes to knit, so she was knitting a lot and sitting down having meals together, watching TV, mainly Bold and the Beautiful and repeats of Friends and Seinfeld and things like that.
She doesn't just knit and watch TV, she works too. At Dilwinia, she's a sweeper, a role reserved for the best behaved prisoners. It's also the highest paying job. She could be earning up to $90 a week.
Her job in induction was to get the greens ready for the people, ask what size you were. She would also take your clothes. So this is very trusted. I'll give her that. She would clean the bathrooms, clean the cells that people would be staying in.
So some of the trusted roles that we have in a correctional centre is the sweeping role as a sweeper is quite trusted, but you may have other areas where it's an even trusted role. So say, for example, reception. If you're in reception where inmates are coming in, you're dealing with property and stuff like that.
If there was any trust issues or social issues or problems, and if she was not the model prisoner that she was, she would never have got that position.
Everyone who's met Catherine in prison says the same thing. She is very well behaved.
I never had any issues with Catherine. She was a very polite, respectful and compliant inmate.
Super calm, no troubles, and zero problems with her in jail ever. Nicest pie lady.
She sounds like the model prisoner, doesn't she? Very quietly spoken, gets on with everybody, enjoys the order of the place.
That this quiet content woman is so at odds with the crimes she's committed is not lost on the people who've met her.
I don't believe for a minute Kath Knight is evil at all. Is it horrendous? Is it the most extreme thing that somebody could do to another human being? Absolutely. Absolutely. That wasn't the woman that I knew.
I don't know how long it takes to skin a full-grown man, but she did it. And she did it all the way through to the end. So, as much as she's nice, and she makes little anecdotal little fucking one-liners, she's still, at the heart of it all, a monster to do that, right?
But Catherine hasn't completely lost her sharp edges.
When I met Catherine Knight, she's quite funny. She goes, she didn't know the quickest way to a man's heart, and I'm like, I know, through his stomach. I'm thinking that's like what you get told in a European household. She goes, nah, through his rib cage. And I was like, I had this little laugh. I was like, and then I found out who she was.
Catherine Knight will die inside prison. That sits just fine with all those who've been traumatized by her crimes.
The people involved in this case tell me that they lie awake at night thinking about Catherine, you know. Pricey's daughter used to lock the bedroom window and lock the bedroom door for fear of Catherine. The thought of her getting out at any time terrify a lot of people.
She may be a docile, compliant inmate, but that's far from the norm. Across Australia, prison staff have to contend with dangerous men and women who could become violent at any moment.
The mini riot began around 2 p.m. when a handcuffed prisoner punched a warden, knocking him unconscious.
With more than 40,000 prisoners detained across the country, riots are always a threat, and inmates have killed at least 12 correctional officers in recent years.
It is a very dangerous job. It has its perils.
One night in Sydney's infamous Long Bay jail, Dominic Pisano nearly became another statistic himself.
There was a night shift and myself and 2 other officers were rostered on the landing.
Every night, guards would move prisoners from one section of the jail to the other. Standard procedure. Except on this particular night, the inmates must have sniffed some sort of opportunity. Without warning, they pounced.
Shortly after 9 o'clock last night, 2 prisoners armed with a mallet and wooden blocks forced their way into the warder's office. 3 prison officers were taken hostage and locked in a cell. There they stayed as the 58 remand prisoners in Wing 13 ran riot.
We barricaded ourselves in the cell with cell furniture, and the reason we did that was we didn't want to be separated.
All Pisano and his colleagues could do was wait. They had no way of knowing if help was on the way.
Just been married probably just a year and a half at the time. I wasn't able to contact her for a number of hours. It was a very daunting situation for everyone.
Authorities only had one option: go in with full force.
They stormed the ring, they had to breach the barricade, there was chemical agents, gas used. Eventually they were able to restore order. They were able to rescue us from the cell and we were taken out.
Coming up on Australia's most dangerous prisoners, guards revealed the harrowing toll of interacting with one of the country's worst criminals.
You're talking the likes of Adrian Bailey, you're just your normal looking bloke. But that normal looking bloke is a rapist and a murderer.
Adrian Bailey is a name etched in the minds of Melburnians. The serial rapist brutally murdered Jill Maher, a total stranger, as she walked home from a night out.
Jill fought very hard and it escalated in a way that it hadn't before. for Adrian Bailey, and he decided that he didn't want to go back to jail, and he thought this was the way out. He thought that he should kill her, silence her, and so he strangled her.
Bailey's crimes landed him a 40-year sentence in Victoria's notorious Barwon prison. Inside jail, he tries hard to be liked.
I think people would see him as a good bloke, somebody who they wouldn't mind spending time with, somebody who would do things for them and so forth.
He's a compliant prisoner. If you didn't know what he did, you probably wouldn't guess it. He comes across like a normal bloke.
In one way, you would describe him as a model prisoner in that he never causes any trouble. Another way of describing it is that he is a suck. I mean, he tries to sort of volunteer for jobs, unpleasant jobs, and be helpful to screws, tries to get on their good side.
But hiding beneath the facade of this nice bloke is a violent murderer. The story of how Bailey unleashed the monster within starts in 2012. On a buzzing Friday night, 29-year-old Jill Marr was at Knockoff Drinks.
When the nights are cold, don't know where to go. I wish I still had my home.
Jill Marr worked at the ABC. She worked for John Fane, who was very highly respected superstar in Melbourne, and Jill was out having drinks with friends from work, and she was so close to her home. She lived in an inner city suburb of Melbourne in an apartment with her husband.
4 kilometres across town, this man, a dangerous man who preyed on women, was also out drinking and would soon cross paths with Jill.
Of course, when it was time to go home, one of the friends said, "I'll walk you home or grab you a cab or something," and she said, "Don't be crazy, I'm just like 5 minutes away." And so she tottered off down the street, you know, minutes from home, husband waiting for her.
She should have walked through the door moments later, but Jill never made it. Her husband, Tom, was worried sick. Cops scoured the streets, turning up her handbag. All they could say with any certainty was it didn't look like Jill had run off somewhere.
What are you going through?
Hell. It's just devastating, but yeah, just trying to push on as much as possible.
A few days after Jill went missing, police uncovered this vision that gave them a vital clue and still makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up.
That chilling footage will never leave me. This very clear footage of Jill walking past and then a man running after her.
The police didn't know it yet, but the man in the video was Adrian Bailey. He had a lengthy rap sheet, more than 20 counts of sexual assault. He was on parole for raping 5 women. He should have been in prison. Instead, he was out drinking.
Adrian Bailey was having some kind of outing with his partner at the same time in the city, and they had an argument. The partner apparently walked out, left him to it. He kept drinking. He was quite drunk by the time he left and headed home. The taxi driver was worried that he might even vomit in the car, so he kind of kicked him out along Sydney Road.
So that's how this serial rapist came to be prowling the streets just as Jill was walking home. The moment they crossed paths was caught on camera.
He sort of called out to her as if to ask her a question. And she turned around politely and answered him. He was asking for directions or something.
Their interaction lasted for mere seconds. Just moments later, Jill was fighting for her life.
He kissed her. He tried to kiss her and grab at her. And Jill was incensed and she slapped him. She slapped his face. And at that stage, he became enraged and he sexually assaulted her on the bonnet of a car in that street. So Bailey murdered Jill Maher in that street, and then he carried her body into a small, very dark alleyway close by.
Bailey returned home to grab his car before driving to the outskirts of the city and dumping her in a shallow grave. But luckily for police, he was no criminal mastermind. Cops tracked Jill's phone as her body was driven out of the city. And when they combed through tolling data, they spotted Bailey's car.
It turned out to be one of the first cases in Australia where phone tower technology really played a part in solving a crime.
Police searched Bailey's home and they found the smoking gun, Jill's SIM card.
Desperate to avoid the cameras, Adrian Bailey is brought into Melbourne's police headquarters. Investigators believe he's the man in the blue hoodie.
Bailey admitted he was the man in the video chasing after Jill. He confessed to raping and murdering her and led police to her grave.
Justice has now been done.
Bailey sentenced to life with a non-parole period of 35 years.
Coming up on Australia's Most Dangerous Prisoners, we'll reveal for the first time Adrian Bailey's sickening version of events.
At the time, it was a believable story. And you ask yourself, fuck, you know, is it possible?
When serial sex offender Adrian Bailey brutally raped and murdered Jill Maher as she was walking home, the country erupted in anger and grief. What made it sting even more was that he should never have been free to prowl the streets. He was on parole for raping another 5 women. Jill's murder prompted a bail crackdown, and that means that inside prison, Bailey has to watch his back.
Adrian Bailey is one of the most hated men in the prison system because no one could get parole after that. The government clamped down. They were never going to win any votes if they didn't.
In fact, he's so loathed that he has to be kept in Barwon's Hoyer Wing, a separate unit for prisoners at risk of being attacked.
Because of the notoriety of the Jill Maher case, he's in the boneyard, which is the protected area of the prison. He's in with other sex offenders or people who need to be in there for their own protection.
Inside prison, Bailey will tell anyone who'll listen his own twisted version of events.
A lot of the protection prisoners try and make up a bullshit reason for them being in protection. Oh, this isn't my fault, I didn't do this. Adrian Bailey was just a grub. You could see it.
But listening to those stories can mess with your head. Former corrections officer Ash Langsworth has never spoken before about the interaction with Bailey that still haunts him.
I was his caseworker and I had a fairly good rapport with Adrian. Conversed with staff on a regular basis. He was joking at times and respectful towards staff. He told me that he had a relationship with Jill. And they had been in a relationship for, a few months, and he told me that he planned to head over to WA with Jill. And he met up with Jill the night in question, and he told me that she decided not to go. And then he struck her in the throat with a clenched fist. And then raped and killed her. At the time, it was a believable story. And you build up this rapport with a prisoner and you ask yourself, fuck, is it possible? But then you get back to reality and it's not the truth.
It wasn't true. It was a disgraceful lie, and one that forensic psychologist James Ogloff was never going to fall for.
He came across as very polite, very engaging, but also very superficial. So I didn't see the real Adrian Bailey. And he said something to the effect that, well, I'm not going to say things that you want me to say just because you want to hear from them. I'm not going to lie. And I said, I think you just have. And so I sort of ended things there.
But the second time Ogloff assessed him, the mask slipped, and he finally told the truth.
He literally burst out crying, and he said words to the effect, that he can't control himself. When he was sexually frustrated, sexually aroused, that, the sort of monster came out within him.
Kept safely away from other prisoners, Bailey's life inside jail is one of order and routine. He has a job and a new religion to keep him occupied.
He converted to Buddhism. He had a Buddhist come in once a month, and that gave him an outlet, I suppose.
Bailey will have plenty of time to dedicate himself to Buddhism. He'll be in his late 80s before he's eligible for parole.
He will definitely apply for parole at the first chance he gets. I assume the community will rise up as one to oppose that, and I assume that he will not understand why, and that he will then apply every chance he gets after that and assume that he should receive parole. He's that kind of character who can convince himself of his own reality.
Coming up, the cold-blooded killer who murdered his girlfriend in a fit of rage.
Simon Gattani was somebody who was incredibly controlling, incredibly angry, incredibly possessive of his partner.
Sydney, July 2011. And this is the last chilling image of former dancer Lisa Harnham. And the man covering her face is her fiancé, Simon Gattani.
You can see the terror in her eyes. It's a blurry CCTV image, but you can see the fear and the urgency that is in her eyes at that moment. 69 seconds after that image is captured, Lisa is dead.
Simon Gattani had a deadly temper, consumed by rage, killing his new fiancée in a high-rise apartment building in the heart of Sydney.
A man's faced court accused of throwing his fiancée to her death from the balcony of their 15th floor apartment last Saturday.
Simon maintained his innocence from the day he was charged until the day he was convicted. But he was charged with murder within a matter of days of Lisa's death.
Bordered by bushland, 150 kilometres northwest of Sydney, Lithgow Correctional Centre is where you'll find Gattani these days. This maximum security jail is home to 360 inmates. Amongst them are some of the state's worst murderers, rapists and gangsters.
He's received work as a sort of sweeper in prison where he's doing cleaning. I mean, there's not a lot that people can do in prison.
Gattani is now a prison cleaner, far from his life as a corporate high flyer. Before that brutal brain snap in 2011, Gattani enjoyed splashing his money around town.
He lived an incredibly flashy, extravagant lifestyle, and there was a lot of evidence in the trial about that lifestyle, the rent on his apartment. He spent a lot of money on clothes. He took particular care of his appearance, and that included designer outfits. He was very interested and almost obsessed by physical fitness.
Around 12 months before the murder, former dancer Lisa Harnham had travelled from Canada to Australia in search of new adventures.
And that's how we play golf. Thank you for watching.
But when she was looking for somewhere to stay, she made a fatal decision.
Lisa and Simon first met when they became flatmates. It did develop sort of very quickly into a very serious relationship.
This home video captures a happy couple in love, but Gattani was not the man he appeared to be. He had a history of petty crime. In one run-in with police, he bit off part of the ear of a detective.
Simon Gattani was incredibly controlling, incredibly angry, incredibly possessive of his partner.
Gattani began to show his true colours. and started to control every aspect of Lisa's life. He told her what to wear, who to see, and where to go. He was so obsessed, he installed CCTV cameras in their apartment.
It was very difficult for her to come and go from the apartment. Indeed, she didn't come and go from the apartment. At a point, she was really only leaving to get groceries. She wasn't working, she wasn't seeing friends and family.
In December 2010, Gattani sent this text to his girlfriend: "Please don't let any guy talk to you today, and please don't look at any guy, because your eyes should only gaze on me, the one." He denied Lisa needed permission to leave their unit, but once sent a text saying, "Who the f*** do you think you are, walking around the house like you own it, or coming and going without my permission?"
Gattani's jealousy was out of control, but the couple seemed stronger than ever. At her 30th birthday celebration, Lisa accepted his proposal of marriage.
They had an incredibly public proposal. It was being filmed, got down on one knee, made a speech, and including in the speech, quite, I think, chillingly, there are comments in there where he talks about like finding someone who would serve him.
But serving Gattani was becoming increasingly claustrophobic and frightening for Lisa. Trapped in his ivory tower and isolated from most of her friends and family, she began planning her escape.
How do you engineer leaving a relationship like that with someone who you know is prone to that kind of fury and rage?
Terrified of what might happen next, Lisa packed her bags and booked a flight home to Canada. But Gattani was a step ahead. He had installed software on her phone to access her messages. He knew she was planning to leave him.
In the early hours of the morning that Lisa died, she had discovered the software, and we know that because she had changed the password to the software, and she changed the password on it to the word trust.
As Lisa tried to run for her life, Gattani's rage boiled over. This confronting moment was caught on the only camera that he hadn't disconnected.
That image shows just how much danger someone is in when they are trying to leave a relationship, like a relationship that Simon and Lisa had, a relationship that was completely defined by controlling behaviour.
34 seconds after callously throwing the woman he professed to love 15 stories to her death, Gattani was captured in a state of panic on CCTV cameras.
He's not bereft, he's angry.
2 years later, when the murder trial began, Gattani had well and truly moved on, regularly turning up at the court with a glamorous new partner, 24-year-old Rachel Louise.
What's happening with the signs, guys? Can you explain?
You can read them, that's the point of them.
Rachel and Simon's family were all completely adamant and never wavering in their belief that Simon had done nothing wrong and that it was a complete miscarriage of justice that he had been charged with Lisa's murder.
Gattani claims she fell from the balcony, despite his efforts to save her. But the testimony of one eyewitness, Joshua Rathmel, was critical in the trial.
To my perception, without a shirt on, carrying what I thought at the time was a black suitcase or bit of luggage or several items, and it looked to me as though he was unloading them, throwing them off.
Josh's evidence was so pivotal because that supported the idea that it had been a man holding an object.
It was someone holding the black object and unloading it.
She must have been rendered unconscious for the fact that her body in Simon's arms was so still and not moving at all.
But Lisa had one final message from beyond the grave.
There was a torn up piece of paper found in Lisa's clothes which said there are cameras inside and outside the house. She did not want him to get away with it.
Gattani's committal hearing was told a woman's screams were heard coming from their apartment the morning Ms Harnham died. The neighbour heard yelling and a female voice screaming out, "God help me, help me."
How fitting that one of the key pieces of evidence was a surveillance video.
His girlfriend yelled, you're wrong," and had to be restrained by friends. She then rushed outside for a cigarette.
Does anyone have a lighter?
One was found, smoking, surrounded by media.
What's going through your head right now, Rachel?
The relationship between Rachel and Simon ended not all that long after the trial.
Cold-blooded killer Simon Gattani was sentenced to a 26-year jail term. with an 18-year non-parole period. Being a high-profile prisoner, he's in the protective wing at Lithgow. If he behaves, he'll be out on parole in 2031. Coming up on Australia's Most Dangerous Prisoners, we reveal how prisoners smuggle phones into jail.
There was a line of about 15 of us, and then all of a sudden this mobile phone starts ringing. Within a short space of time, you could actually see whose vagina was ringing.
Inside Aussie prisons, criminals aren't the only ones authorities have to watch out for. Although corruption is extremely rare, it does happen.
Now, most correctional services officers are obviously very, very diligent, honest and hard-working, but there are some there that will succumb, obviously, when there's enormous amounts of money waved in front of you, or retribution to something you've done, or something like that.
I believe there's a level of people letting it happen. Obviously, that's why officers have lost their jobs, because they've been caught.
One of the most popular items of contraband are mobile phones. They're banned in prison and are precious for criminals.
Every time we brought in a mobile phone, which was like burner phones they call them, it's not a lingo, $500 a phone. Next day, you got cell phones ringing off in the cell. No one knows how they got there, because in maximum, when I work visits, we'd strip the inmates, we'd say bend over, literally open your legs, and you'd cough. There's no way you're putting a fucking iPhone up your ass.
Well, I would leave that to your imagination, but inmates, you know the size of mobile phones today, and inmates have ingenious ways of hiding these things.
Former prisoner Kerry Tucker has seen some of the ways women conceal their phones.
I remember some new person had brought in a mobile phone, and they'd banked it, inserted it vaginally, and they had it in Glad wrap and whatever else. And I remember we're in the leisure centre, we're all standing up, there's a line of about 15 of us, and then all of a sudden this mobile phone starts ringing. Within a short space of time, you could actually see whose vagina was ringing. And I was like, oh God, she didn't think to take the battery out or turn it off.
If prisoners aren't smuggling their phones in, they have to rely on public phones and can only use them at set times. For former prisoner Taylor Budden, that meant chancing violence.
An incident happened where one of the girls jumped the phone queue on me when I was standing there for ages. And for me, the phone was very important. It was my only connection to the outside and my partner at the time. And I waited, and I was about to go on, and it got snatched from me. And I said to her, you have to wait, you can't do that. And then she sort of went to punch on with me. And as soon as I went to, hit her back, I was the one that got dragged away. I was then segregated and put into an isolation cell in just a hospital gown and a pair of undies and a bra with no TV, nothing. And that's where I stood for 12 days.
Prisons are tough places. They can be hard to survive, even if you're a dangerous criminal. But murderer Kath Knight seems to enjoy it.
Joy, her twin sister, visited her, and she said, I'm happy here. It's bizarre. She'd left that dangerous world behind. She told Joy not to visit her anymore. She didn't really need visitors.
Serial rapist and murderer Adrian Bailey lies to everyone, and himself.
He really does believe that he can live in the outside world with the rest of us, that he should live with us, that he should be given every opportunity to do so, and that he's been highly misunderstood.
Simon Gattani, who murdered his fiancée Lisa Harnham, still has many years behind bars to contemplate his horrific crime. But he appears to be making the best of his time inside.
Simon is an incredibly rigid, disciplined person. You know, there was someone, he had a very extreme devotion to fitness. He also had been very committed to his faith, and he had spent time as a young person in a monastery overseas. I don't think they can compare to what it's like being in jail, but there's perhaps certain elements of Simon's character that he's had to lean on in the years that he's spent in prison. There are still possibilities for Simon, even once he's out of jail, even though he'll be sort of in his 60s. Lisa is forever 30.
Some are still delusional. Some are just getting on with their lives inside. But for all of them, justice has been served.